So yeah, you can't actually describe this to a fire. Well, yeah, it's like when you rub this thing, it's sort of fire. Some things are like some material is top. It seems like unless you have some kind of similar, so
Alright, hey guys, real quick, we just need to Mike check if Andy's in the other room just to see whether or not we can pick up from over there. If so, hopefully he comes back here and tells us that we can. If you're there on the internet, hi. Alright, Andy, you're welcome to come back anytime.
is anybody on that?
So I just got
Yeah, the less quiet everybody is, the easier it is. More or less quiet.
Use this thing.
I signed up for Jim.
the other one is
But I tell her because they come in with 3 minutes saying, I want to go.
Oh, really?
It's great. And you feel guilty too because it's like, okay, you know, like I was falling asleep, I could go do this, but then like, I
know you was last time.
We're going to get started in just a couple of minutes here, so make sure if you got any beers to go up there real quick. Just going to wait for a few more people to trickle in, and then we'll get going.
yes, we are.
Do you know my hair? I'm trying to be on it. Maybe. You know him.
All right. So, are we getting ready to start here, Mr. President? Yeah, I was going to say, let's get through the first one. Let's do the conversation.
All right, we're going to get going. Pay attention to Drew. Make sure you got an open glass.
All right. Hi, everybody. Hello, Internet. We're now live.
Does everybody have a glass?
So, real quick, before we start with the actual formal tasting for today, I decided I just spent Christmas in Florida with my family and spent it over in Tampa Bay. And Tampa Bay is the hub of Florida's beer activity right now. It's kind of like what Florida's version of San Diego. And so one of the places that we stopped was Cigar City Brewing Company, which started 5 or 6 years ago, relatively tiny in a warehouse owned by the with the Winkles family, and now it has taken over the whole damn complex and is brewing more beer than you can possibly imagine. And so I decided just on a whim to pick up one of their specialty beers that they did called Florida Man Loses Bet. They have one of their popular beers that they do is called Florida Man, and it's a reference to the fact that if you watch the news or read the news anywhere, you always see news stories about today in Florida, Florida man did blank. Thanks to Florida's open arrest records, Florida is now known as the crazy place in the country because you can find any news story that you want just from trolling through the arrest records.
Oh, it's
So,
because of the record.
Yeah, they're all
not because it's full of crazy people.
No, well, it is full of crazy people. But they did a bet with 3 Floyd's Brewing Company up in Munster, Indiana, about the Stanley Cup. It was the Blackhawks versus the Lightning, and the Blackhawks won the series, so the Florida Man lost the bet, and they brewed this collaboration beer with them. They call it a rye American black ale. Go for it. Yeah. So one great advantage, we talked a little bit about cans over the years. One great advantage of cans is the fact that, hey, it's easier to bring them home. Less risky than the damn thing's breaking in the elevator. So don't forget to thank today. We don't have Jim Mormon doing his usual stewardship role of pouring beer on everybody, but we do have our lovely assistants of Kevin Baranowski and Steve Cook.
Yeah.
Make sure you congratulate them for all the spilling they will do.
Should we say no?
That'd be small.
Yeah, so to my mind, this is very much American craft brewery in a glass. Kind of big everywhere, sort of exuberant and over the top in a lot of ways. Black IPAs are still, one of those hotly contested items of, is black IPA anything really more than just a colored IPA? Does it bring its own characteristics, or is it just another name for an American porter? This one definitely has some porterish characteristics to it, but it's way more dominated by the hops than I think most American porters would ever be. Any comments? Steve?
It's got a decent amount of roast to it.
Yeah, well, and that's the thing, right? Steve?
Yes.
You got
Sorry.
well, that's the thing about black IPA, right? One of the big debates is, do you get, is roast a thing that should be in it, right? A lot of the black IPAs that originally started up in the mid-2000s, like the first ones that kind of kicked off the trend, were all about, we don't want a roast, we don't want that character, all we want is the color. So a lot of them were either colored with Cinnamar, or they were colored with Caraffa that was capped up on the mash. So a lot of ways of doing nothing, every way to extract color while reducing the amount of characteristic. That's kind of gone back and forth. There are some people who do roast in it. There are some people who don't. This obviously has a roasty character to it. What happened to the glasses? Do we still have more glasses on it? If anybody needs a glass, plastic is right up here.
Or you can buy a cup here. We have some lovely Caribbean cups.
Yeah, these are very spiffy.
Buy one new cabinet. They are a must-have.
Yeah, this is, for lack of a better way of putting it, this is a pine bomb. Total pine bomb without any of the citrus or any of the other kind of modern, newfangled tropical fruit notes that you find in some new American IPAs. It has a little bit of that rye spiciness to it, but it definitely has a fair amount of black acridness to it as well. And I'm still not entirely sold on the concept of combining roast with a very sharp hop character, because I think the two work at cross purposes, but this one's still working pretty well. Hey, you! Oh, alright, thanks. Alright, you're now on the internet. Say hi, everybody.
Hi,
You can write what you have to serve there, if you like. That would be a great public
let's go ahead and get the floor pulled up. All right, so that's your special taste of the month. Remember, I was trying to do that as a thing. I failed miserably at it, but this month was pretty easy. So we're going to go, last month we did Christmas and holiday beers with a Belgian flail. Belgian flail. I swear. A Belgian flare. This month we're kind of doing big, gnarly, malty, hoppy, crazy beers that are much more in a British and American tradition in terms of these things. So we're going to start with one of my absolute favorite beers, which is not technically a Christmas beer, but screw it, it's a great beer, and I'll take any excuse for it. And that's the Fuller's Vintage Ale. This past year's 2014. If you were at the Stuffed Sandwich Holiday tasting, you got to have a lovely vertical of 3 different years of the Fuller's Vintage Ale, and it was awesome. Different people had different opinions about the 3 different years that we had. This is 2014. Before we talk about the beer and the brewing process, we're going to take a brief moment to take a kilt break. You may or may not have noticed that I am in slightly different attire today. Yes, thank you. It's not summer here, so my legs are not in California shape. This kilt that I am wearing, it's a sport kilt. This tartan is the California state tartan. California actually has a state tartan. It's adapted from the John Muir pattern, which was is another registered tartan. It was designed and promoted and eventually sort of pushed into law by a member of the club, a guy by the name of J. Howard Standing, Esquire. I've never seen his name written without the Esquire attached to it. And he was very proud of his Scottish heritage, and he pushed the California State Legislature to adopt an official state tartan. This is the state tartan. And because J. Howard was a longtime member of the club, and who is the guy who gave us the bird that is sitting in front of Fletch, he's the reason that we have Hashel. We figured on the board that it would be appropriate that the club, where there are some men who do like to wear kilts, had an official tartan. And so in that vein, we have adopted the California state tartan as the official tartan of the Buffalo Mountains. All right. Now, by the way, if you want a kilt just like this, there is the West Coast's first kilt shop, opened up about 3 blocks away from my house in Pasadena. And they're called Off Kilter Kilts, and they gave me referral cards to give you a discount. And if enough people are interested, we can actually put together a bulk order of kilts. And what I would love to see us do, yeah. Well, so these are sport kilts. These are relatively inexpensive. This one is like $60. Really? Yep. So, and they come with this patch on them. I would love to see it if we actually put the club's official patch on. I agree. Yeah, so like So, if you're interested, I'll start a poll. We can talk about that later. All right, so there you go. Official club tartan. Enjoy. Yeah. All right.
What are you wearing that time?
Nothing's worn under the
Socks and shoes, blue ribbon.
I don't know where you've been, but I see one. Hey, Drew? Yeah. All right.
The answer is nothing's worn, everything's in perfect working order.
Exactly. All right. So Fuller's Vintage Ale. Like I said before, Fuller's is one of my favorite breweries in the world. They are sort of traditionalists who have kept it going and maintained their kind of quality over the years, despite being a fairly large brewing company now. And Fuller's Vintage Ale has always been one of my favorites because it's very special and it's damn tasty.
They're in England, right? Where's Fuller's at?
London.
Okay.
All right.
Would this fall into a beer style? This your particular one?
This is an old ale barley wine. This is classical, at least in my mind.
What's
Now,
what's alcohol?
this is like, I think 7 point something? 8.5. So, again, remember my usual rant about British beers? 8.5 is almost like a lethal weapon in terms of British beer culture. Because again, a lot of British beers come in that 3.2 to 4% range, right? So, 8.5 is pretty damn deadly. After all, like I said, Stella Artois is nicknamed the wife beater because it gets you so drunk so much quicker, right? But Fuller's, one of the things I love about Fuller's, and the reason why people have a hard time as homebrewers replicating Fuller's recipes. Fuller's is still very dedicated to the art of doing party-style brewing. If you don't know party-style brewing, the real quick synopsis of it, it's the old-fashioned way of brewing before everybody had hydrometers and figured out like how to maximally sparge, pull all the sugar out of everything. You did party-style. And what party-style literally means is you take the same amount of grain, the same grain bed, and you pull wort from it multiple times. You reinfuse water into it, let it sit, do its magic, and pull more wort. Now, if you're not being super efficient about your malt and your mash, like the old-fashioned brewers would have been, that means that you got 3 worts of different strengths. Yeah, in a traditional world, it was 3, possibly 4 different pulls. The wort getting weaker as you went, and the beers becoming smaller. Now, Fuller's still does this today. A lot of people have abandoned it to do brewing exactly like we do, where you have 1 mash, then sparge, right? And maximal sugar extraction all into 1 volume of water. Well, Fuller's still does party-style. They traditionally do 3 pulls, and they go into 3 separate coppers. They call them coppers, which is just a fancy brewery term for boil bill. 3 separate coppers. It's the exact same malt bill for almost all of their bills, or all their beers. And the only difference between the beers is the ratio of those 3 kettles that get blended together. So something like their low-end beer, their small beer, is Chizzy Bitter or Chiswick Bitter. That's almost all copper C. London Pride is almost all copper B. ESB is almost all copper A, with a little bit of B or C blended in to adjust the beer to its final character. Fuller's Vintage, I believe, is all copper A, right? So, no, that's just my speculation. Somebody on the internet's going to tell me I'm wrong, whatever. But it is very much the case. Part of the reason why people have trouble trying to say, oh, I really love Fuller's ESB, and replicate it at home, is because most of us don't go through the work of doing this party-style process. So we try and nail it in a single mash, and in reality, you're getting something radically different when you're doing this party-style process. A long time ago, Cullen led a shop brew here where we actually did a full party-style. We pulled 3 separate mashes, or 3 separate runoffs, and we did a whole bunch of different work. And I think that's the closest we've ever been to those things.
That's some damn good beer.
Yeah, it was. We should do it again, but it's a lot of work.
I do a similar kind of a thing when I brew at home, but I just do 2 vessels, and I do a steady sparge. It's just that I collect first, and then I collect the second half, and they're both different. Usually blend a little bit just to get some of the richness of the first one into the next one, and vice versa, lighten up the first part. But it's kind of a next step away from full sparge.
And also, doing party-style is a great way.
2 different brews from 1 batch.
Yeah, I was gonna say it's a great way if you're the sort of He-Man macho brewer guy who's like all about I'm going to extract maximum sugar and make a 19% ale out of this wort. One of the things you have to realize is that no matter how good you are at your sparge, you're leaving sugar behind. And so so if you're doing that, guess what? Go grab some more water, pull another wort, and you make an easy 5-gallon batch out of the rest of what's left over in your grains. It's a fantastic way to get a nice small beer, so you can have that while you're waiting for the big one to finish.
Blended after fermentation, before?
Well, no, I think Fuller's does it before. Don't quote me on that, but I believe they do it before. Now, Fuller's Vintage, one of the nice things about this is also a brewer's playground beer. It changes from year to year, largely around the hopping, right? So this year's version, or the 2014 version here, sorry, says they used, it's their 18th edition of this beer, 3 of this year's finest hop varieties from both sides of the Atlantic. Goldings from England have been used for subtle bitterness, and American varieties Liberty and Cascade were used in dry hopping to give it a zesty aroma. Right? Now the other one that is also sort of funny, a lot of brewers from other countries, you'll see like Budweiser and company talking about like born on dating, like when this beer was born. Most other places they'll do best by or best before, right? And so this one is best before the end of 2024. They feel like this could take some really serious age. And I'll tell you, I think it could. But as it's pouring right now, oh jeez.
Lose all that hops.
Hey, these bottles say bottle condition. Could some intrepid soul perhaps culture
the yeast from one of those bottles?
You could, but I think you'd be smarter to just go grab a pack of London ESB from the shop.
Because it might not be the same yeast.
Well, it might not be the same yeast, but it's also.
In this case, I think it probably would be.
But yeah, but the other problem is, since this is a strong beer, the yeast is going to have harder issues kind of.
So you get rid of their ESBs.
Yeah. But, and by the way, don't forget, Fuller's owns the term ESB, so you can never use that, unfortunately. But, so, yeah, they trademarked it, because they were the only ones really doing it. And so they now own the term ESB. Kind of like Anchor owns Steam. Alright, any comments about the vintage? Well, you can say positive things, too. What do you feel about the malt here? Great.
Honey.
Yeah, honey. And now keep in mind, this is probably a very straightforward malt, right? This is probably just a mostly pale malt. And we'll talk about this in a bit. But to me, there's also, the Goldings. Usually, I kind of think of Goldings as being a little dirty, but this is actually kind of a really nice. This has got a nice bitterness to it. Yeah, it's good enough that you are not feeling the sweetness of the malt, but not overpowering, and you're definitely getting the cascades in the finish.
Yeah.
So, any other comments? Is it just so early that you guys don't have them?
Well, so do you think the caramel just comes from a long boil time, or what's it going from? Just a simple.
Yeah, I think it's straight up from the boil. Yeah. So, all right. You guys, any other things?
What was that mashing? It's nice to get the.
The mashing's called Party Guile. PARTI-GYLE. Party Guile.
I never would have spelled that correctly.
The biggest problem with Party Guile.
Party guy.
Party guy.
An association.
Yeah, welcome to my life. All right. But yeah, Party Guile, it's an old term. Very, very old. So that's where guile is literally, like, I think it's a mash. I think it was a term for a mash. Don't quote me on that, I forget. But Party Guile, and it's a great way to brew. Really, but given the way that we tend to brew nowadays, it tends to be more of like, I'm going to be epic about my brewing. It's also really great if you really want to push for something super large. You do this, you do basically no sparge to get your first beer, because otherwise you're going to get a lot of water that you have to do a lot of boil for. And then just go ahead and screw it and take the second runnings out and get a smaller beer out of it. Now, I've done Party Guile beers before, where the original gravity for the first pull, the first 5 gallons work. And by the way, the rule of thumb is 2/3 of the sugar comes out in 1/3, the first third of the runoff. So I've done 15 gallons, where the first pull was up around like 11:20. And the second pull at 10 gallons was around 10:55, 10:60. So even then, it's not a small beer. So it's a great way to brew. It does take a little more coordination, and it does take stepping outside of what you're used to. Yeah, the Falconsclaws. But it can produce some really wonderful results, and you'll have some of the results later. All right, so let's move on to the Schmalz Brewing Channukah in Kentucky.
Yes.
The holy one.
Yeah, nice. So I have to take a look here real quick, study up. Sorry, yeah, I can't quite clear my throat with the appropriate fashion. Yeah. All right. So, Schmalz Brewing for years and years and years. They were known for their beers like Hebrew, the Chosen Beer, or the Messiah, a bunch of different things that they've done. And they were always a contract brewery. They were a contract brewery for years and years and years, until either this year either 2015 or 2014, and they finally opened up their own brewery in New York. So this is their Hanukkah in New York. They do a Hanukkah beer every year because, hey, they're Jewish and not Christmassy. And obviously, since this is Hanukkah in Kentucky, they don't give a lot of notes on this, and I didn't have the time to actually say, I don't know, do research. and it must be barrel aged. It comes in at a whopping 8%, but it's 8 malts. Oh yeah, hi, it would help if I read part of the label. Dark ale aged in Heaven Hill and Jim Beam bourbon barrels, 8 malts and 8 hops, 8% alcohol. Their Hanukkah beers always follow the 8 for obvious reasons. All right.
Yeah, I don't know. When you told me to follow the sequence, I actually got to 15, 15, 15, and then realized I was stupid. So.
Yeah. And a couple of years ago, I think 2 years ago, they had a Hanukkah gift pack.
Yeah, it's like a beer menorah.
Yeah, that was a beer menorah, and each of the bottles was a redo of one of the previous Hanukkah. So this obviously has a fair amount of that dusty, dark barrel character to it. What I kind of think of like almost sucking on a wood chip. Big fruitiness. Big fruitiness. Definite bourbon character. Vanilla. But then also a lot of that, like I said, it tastes a lot like the char on the barrel. Right? So that very sort of dry, dusty, tanniny thing that's kind of hitting the back of your palate. Now, here's the other thing I will say is that I remember when Hebrew first launched, and particularly when they first started doing some of their Hanukkah beers, that the beers were relatively underwhelming and they seemed less well executed than you would hope for. This is a definite step up, I think, in terms of the execution. Now, I don't know if I agree with the recipe, but that's me. One of the things that we'll talk about as we're going on here, you'll see there's a very common theme here amongst the beers that we're going to taste today, where these are all kind of just very sort of big, gnarly, complex beers, except for that Fuller's. And I can pretty much guarantee you that even by the end of the tasting, that Fuller's is still probably going to be my favorite. Because despite the fact that I'm known for doing things like clam chowder saison or champagne beers or really crazy intricate things, the thing that I truly do appreciate in recipe design is simplicity in the recipe. Because I think a lot of times as homebrewers we tend to gild the lily a little too much. And I think something like this Hanukkah beer with the 8 malts and the 8 hops tends to gild the lily a little too much because I don't think it actually adds anything. I think it kind of muddles the final beer. Huh? Gilding. All right. Gilding. There's only 4. All right. Yeah, lily's kind of a low gender to be gilded. All right. Any comments about the Hanukkah in Kentucky?
It's okay.
Mike? All right. Say, what is it? So Kevin back here behind me just said he thinks it needs to sit. Other comments? Like, is there anything that you absolutely adore in this beer?
No.
Yep. Oh yeah. The bottling date on this one is 10/19/2015. So it is relatively. So.
Is there anybody else getting oxidation?
Well, I think what I'm getting, like I got something that I felt like was oxidation, but I think it might be the barrel character. Yeah. And it may actually be micro oxidation from the barrel.
Well,
yeah.
how long does the barrel for?
They don't say.
Long enough. Long enough.
Yeah, it just says aged in. So the problem is it doesn't take that long for you to start to pick up micro oxidation notes. But yeah. So maybe what I'll do is I'll run back out to the store, see if there's any more of this on the shelves, grab some and save them. All right, good. For next Hanukkah, which we're excited to be on. All right. Any other comments? So far, it seems like, just judging from the crowd, this gets a relatively astounding nick. Nick. It's not bad, but it's not doing anything to excite you. All right. All right. Quick show of hands. How many people like the Fuller's Vintage the best?
What about Florida?
That's not in this one. All right. And how many people like the Hanukkah and Kentucky beer the best? Stuck out the game. All right. All right. For this one, we only have a few small bottles, so expect small pours. But then again, this is also a beer that is a spruce beer. So I expect most people that don't like pale. All right. Not much on the smell. Big damn punch in the aroma. Or big damn punch on the palate. All right, so this is Dogfishhead's. This is Dogfishhead's Pennsylvania Tuxedo. See this? So Pennsylvania Tuxedo, I think, made a long yards. So let's see. Yep. All right, here we go. Pennsylvania Tuxedo pays homage to the flannel-suited hunters and gatherers who dwell deep in the backcountry of north central PA. Brewed in collaboration with family-run outdoor clothing company Woolwich, Pennsylvania Tuxedo has a grassy citrus kick complemented by the resinous conifer notes of fresh green spruce tips. This is 8.5%, so a nice healthy percentage amount. Spruce has a very long tradition in brewing. It has a relatively controversial tradition in modern brewing. Because for the most part, people go, you bastards, you made me taste a pine cone. So spruce though does really have a long history in brewing. Think back to like gruit ales, like what Steve over here is known for making his gruits. Before hops were the primary accepted way of bittering, all the way back to the time of the Babylonians and the Sumerians. You see different spices and different additives being used to bitter and flavor a beer. The Babylonians, for instance, used basically coriander and radish and a couple other things. A lot of northern European beers from Germany up into the Scandinavian countries and Finland used a lot of spruce. But one of the big problems, the reason why spruce has a bad reputation here in American homebrewers is a lot of times American homebrewers, to do spruce beers, have used spruce flavor extracts that you can find in your homebrew shop. And oh boy, those only require very, very, very tiny a little bit. But people tend to go, hey, it's a 4-ounce bottle, that must mean it's good enough for 5 gallons. And next thing you know, you've got a beer that takes 5 years before it tastes like anything other than pine salt. Now, if you look at traditional brewing practices with spruce and the other conifer trees, you'll see things like what you see out of Finland, where with their satay recipe, which is the traditional farmhouse type beer, where the mash is literally done in conifer logs that have been hollowed out, and instead of having like a nice braid or a false bottom, the mash itself is actually filtered through a bed of juniper or spruce or other conifer branches. Well, and then in the boil, but also the mash liquor and the boil kettle are sweetened with the addition of juniper and spruce. So the liquor itself is also infused with those flavors.
So is there hops in here?
No, typically not. Now, are there hops in this one?
There are hops in here.
Yeah, there have to be hops in this one because of the way U.S. tax law works. Even Dogfishhead's really old school recipes, like their Midas Touch, all the way back in time, they still have hops in there, even though those wouldn't have been in the original recipe, just to avoid different tax calculations in the U.S. So that's what you need. All right. So what do we think? Now, for me, the very first thing, my first reaction was, okay, so spruce beer. Well, I'm not getting a big sprucey kick in the nose. I get some hops. Yeah. And then suddenly it's like, I go and take a taste.
What's the ABV?
8.5. And then the taste is spruce, with a lot of piney American hops. So now, Kevin mentioned, like Anchor R Special Ale in years past has been incredibly sprucey. Like, I think a good portion of the reason why people talk about Anchor R Special Ale, there's only 5.5%, needing 5 years to age before it's really drinkable, was because of the amount of like spruce and wintergreen and other sort of conifers that are added to it. This, I think, actually where it's at, it's a big punch of spruce, but it's not a big punch of spruce in the way that it's so domineering that you can't taste anything else. Because again, we're getting that piney American hop. No, if it was completely overwhelming, spruce was all you're getting. This, they've actually kind of, I'd still like to see it lower. Because I tend to like things a little bit more on the softer side. Yeah. So we have some time to talk about this beer while Kevin's doing it. All right.
Wax on.
Drew,
Wax on.
this was pretty cool.
Yeah. Yeah. Sorry. Apparently during cold LA winters, beers don't warm up as quickly as they usually do. All right. Now, what do we think of the ball character? Kind of hard to get.
Yeah.
It's mostly again. It feels like it's mostly pale malt.
It's there.
Well, again, I think my personal preference would be to pull this first back by about another third from where it is. But in truth, given the fact that this is a brand new spruce beer, this is not overwhelming amounts of spruce. It only takes a little bit, and it's hard to get to. By the way, the best thing that you can ever do, and really hard for us to do because hey, we're in California. If you want to brew with something like spruce tips or pine tips or anything else like that, pay attention to that word tips. There are a lot of people out there who what they'll do is they'll go out and they'll hack off a branch or something and shred the needles and throw that into them. The real key is to go get yourself fresh tips, like the brand new, just sap-filled buds that are like right out there at the end. One of the most eye-opening experiences I ever had. I went to a talk given by Jeff Larson of Alaska Brewing Company.
Oh, wait, I have a question. I heard certain tips can be poisonous.
They can be. Double check first before you do it. The problem is things like pine, for instance. Pine is pretty heavy in terpenes, which is the basic starting ingredient for turpentine. So that's bad. But spruce is pretty safe. But again, I went to a talk given by Jeff Larson of Alaskan Brewing Company, and he was talking about making a spruce beer. And what he brought down to that talk was a giant pile of fresh tips that they'd harvested for use in this beer, and he handed them out to people in this talk. This was back in the days of the AHA conference when it wasn't 500 people in a room listening to a lecture. But he handed these out to the people at the talk to sample. Smell them, pop them in your mouth, chew them. They were almost like spruce candy because they were so sweet. And they had a really fresh spruce flavor and aroma, but they didn't have that strong resinous character, that strong bitter that really sort of makes a lot of these beers, not work. So it was really interesting to see just these fresh tips. They were almost as sweet as if somebody handed you a drop candy. So very cool, and that's the really proper way to do it. But of course, here in Southern California, we're kind of shit out of luck on that angle, unless you go find some hidden grove of spruces somewhere and have match time to harvest it. We're good? You hack through it? All right. So, by the way, brewers, don't wax your bottles.
So pretty.
I know, but it's missing people like them. Yeah, I would totally accept the idea of doing a tincture. The problem is actually a lot of things that are resinous don't necessarily work as well in tinctures. So I'd have to play with it before I get it on 100% thumbs up.
So the relative fruitiness between the flavor and the aroma, is that almost is that analogous like hops? Like you do like a dry sprucing or something to bring the aroma up?
Yeah, I don't know. I haven't played around with spruce enough to be able to tell you for certain. But I would suspect that the spruce that's in here is not a mild edition. Yeah, because then I would expect to see or no, actually, wait, hold on. Take it back, flip it, pop it. I would suspect that this is a boil edition because most of the oils are gone. Right. All right. Real quick,
Can we get a guide of maybe in the future about how we can use pines, not poisonous pines, for making beer? Poisonous pines. I always wanted to make one, but I don't know.
I'll try to do some research and figure it out. All right. Quick show of hands. How many people their favorite is the 2014 Fuller's Vintage. Alright. How many people's favorite is the Hebrew? How many people's favorite is the Dogfishhead Pennsylvania Tuxedo? Alright. Got a couple of them here. It's good.
No lunch for you.
Yeah, we're just going to do this the way I always do it, guys. Alright, so now we're going to go on to another one of my favorite beers. This has been done by Deschutes Brewing Company for, I don't even know how long, a long, long time. Jubel Ale as their sort of winter seasonal. They just started recently doing these, what they're calling Super Jubels. And this is Super Jubel. And this is the 2015 version that is aged, it says ale with 50% aged in Pinot and Oregon oak barrels. So I suspect that means Pinot Noir because that's Oregon. And they say here, affectionately referred to as Super Jubel. Jubel 2015 is an imperial take on our festive winter ale. Notes of toasted caramel, raisins, dates, and figs are complemented by spicy and herbal hop aromas. Originally planned as a once-in-a-decade ale, we just couldn't wait another 5 years. This is 10.5%? 10.4. 10.4. So a bit of an eye-opener, or maybe a bit of a drowsy beer. Craig's got the right idea. Give it a little bit of warming, because these are still fairly cold, even though they've been out of the...
You have no ice in there.
No, I have no ice in here. It's just, well, the cooler was sitting in my garage, the beers were sitting in the chest freezer in the garage. So, yeah, they haven't had a long opportunity to warm up.
So the smaller strength one is really just
I would suspect. Now, regular Jubel comes in 6-packs, and it is a great damn beer. I think it comes in at like 6.5, 7. It's, it's more, it's about as American English take on an English beer. Yeah. And it's just a great beer. You just sit there, nights are kind of clammy and cold, pop one of those open, pour it in a glass, and just feel it sort of infuse through you, right? Without feeling like you're being stupefied.
So would this be like almost one line of like Schmalz with Stingo along that kind of pattern line?
Kind of, but then, right? So, oompified. Although we're going to get even oopier here in a second. So, now what are we thinking about this?
Milk to it.
Yeah, but you get, when you smell it, you are getting, there is those tones of the wood. Yeah, you're getting some of that sandalwood, some of the cinnamon, some vanilla. You're getting a little bit of those grape tannin type things going on. Yeah. A lot of dark fruit in the nose. I think this is like 14. Yeah, a lot of tans in the mouth. Surprisingly brisk hop character in the back. The malt body itself, actually, for something this big and this rich smelling, actually dies away fairly quick. Like it actually comes to an amazingly dry finish. What else are we thinking?
You definitely taste the alcohol in this one.
Depends on your palate. Some people like the taste of the alcohol, some people don't. I was going to say, like to me, the biggest thing about this is it's amazing how fast this drops. Like usually you're thinking something that's going to be this big is going to like really stick there. Now, here's one of our rules, and I'm going to use the Jubel here for a reason. So this is Super Jubel, right? This is an amped up version of the regular Jubel. Now, so here's my brewer's lesson to everybody out there, because we all have lower gravity beers that we really love, right? So like, Steve, you're doing your Southern English Brown here as the shop brewer this month? Yep. All right. So now, what do you want, if you want to take Steve's Southern English Brown and amp it up, kind of imperialize it, the temptation is just go into Pro Mash, Beersmith, or whatever software you use, or a calculator, and just go, Okay, well, I need to double the gravity, so I'm just going to double everything, right? So double the pale malt, double the crystal, double all the adjuncts, double everything else. And that's what a lot of people do. Don't do that. Don't scale your beer recipes that way, because what I've always found, this is personal philosophy, but I think it's a good one. If you disagree with me, then you're allowed to be wrong. My recommendation to new brewers, or to brewers who are trying to do this sort of thing, is to always take your first attempt, and instead of just flat out raising everything, raise your base malt. Instead of, if you need to double the amount of gravity that you're getting, make it so that the base malt is bringing most of those gravity points. Maybe boost your adjuncts a little bit, but not a lot. And so by that I mean, maybe add a little extra crystal malt, maybe add a little extra roast, although be careful with the roast. But really start with the primary focus being 90% of that, 90% or more of that additional gravity from your base malt. And the reason I say that is because if you do that, you avoid sort of that caramel malt and adjunct malt sort of buildup, right? All these malts are giving a lot of flavonoids into the beer, right? They're giving a lot of things that affect your tongue. And you've already probably piled them up in your initial beer. And then when you're piling in all this extra malt and all this extra alcohol and the extra hops and everything else, it kind of becomes completely overwhelming. It's out of sync, it's out of proportion, right? So if you're going to do something like a super version of one of your beers, really start with that beer recipe and just bump the base malt. All right, and I guarantee you you'll have a much better attempt your first time out the gate than if you were to go and turn around and say, hey, I'm just going to double everything, right? Because I would suspect, given how well this dries out, they did a lot of that.
Did they say what the hops are?
I didn't see anything saying the hops, no. The spicy and herbal hop aroma. So that to me says no Cascade, no American Seas. Obviously none of the newfangled American tropical hops. This is probably more like Columbus and those guys. And also given that they're in Oregon, Atlanta.
To go from a 5 to 10% beer, would you use double the hops by the recipe, or would you?
No, actually you have to kind of play tricks there, right? Because as your original gravity goes up in the kettle, your hop utilization goes down. So for this one, I would actually use a hop calculator, because actually doubling hops isn't going to be enough.
That would be enough.
Yeah. Because as you increase the wort gravity,
He just contradicting himself. That's a what?
yeah. I said the malt.
Well, you didn't explain that. I didn't hear that.
All right. So on the hops, actually use a hop calculator to do this, because as you increase the original gravity of your wort, you decrease the amount of isoalpha isomerization that you get, right? And that means less bitterness in the final beer. So play around with it. And again, even then, I would still, along the same lines as my malt philosophy, I would still take most of the hit in terms of hop increase in the bearing charge, and not in the later aroma charges, aroma and flavor charges. Because I don't think you'll get the same results. I think you'll actually go out of whack there too. So just like with the base malt, increase the base malt to get most of your gravity, increase your bittering hops to get most of your hop character. Right? And even then, I wouldn't necessarily go for a strict doubling, because it doesn't register that way on the human palate.
But wouldn't the IBUs indicate that?
Yeah, but I mean, again, people, if you just strictly doubled, right, then you would.
Most calculators take into consideration the
they
amount, density, etc.
But I'm saying, don't just double it by math. Just double it by the hop calculator, so that you'll. All right. All right. So what do we think? Any other notes about the Jubel? Jubel.
I want to double the yeast.
I don't think you need to double the yeast. This thing's dry enough.
Maybe it needs aging.
Yeah.
10 instead of
All right.
much.
So let's go back through the list. Fullers. All right. Hebrew, Hanukkah, Kentucky. All right. Pennsylvania, Tuxedo. A couple of hangouts there. There we go. And then finally, the Deschutes Super Jubel and Pinot. All right, guys, got a couple of adherents too. All right. I need to learn to drink while we talk.
Talking's never a problem.
Yeah, exactly. No, I mean drinking so that I'm done before so I don't have to do that. Because, yeah, by the way, That last little shot of Jubel there, like a nice big expression. Ha! Good job. All right, so now we're on to I think another one of my favorite breweries. On another one of my favorite breweries and a longtime supporter of the Falcons. This is Hair of the Dog Brewing Company up in Portland, Oregon. And this is their Doggie Claws. Doggie Claws, this is 2015. So again, we're tasting all these super fresh. This is 11% by volume. Now, Hair of the Dog is located in Portland, across the tracks. And they've had them for a long time in a World War II warehouse. I haven't been there recently, so I don't know if they've moved or not. I know they opened up a new tasting room and all that. But one of the things that always cracked me up about it, at least when I was in there, they had this giant malt silo inside the warehouse. And it was easily like the biggest, fattest malt silo I've ever seen. Like, yeah, even as fat as I was, like you could have probably times me by about 1,000 and fit me in there. And then here's why it amused me. Big fat malt silo to fit into the roof of this warehouse. Tiny 4-barrel brew kettle. Really? Oh yeah. You look at this thing next to the malt silo, and it was hysterical. And it was a steam-jacketed Campbell's soup pot that they used to boil peas for Campbell's soup. They had the big strainer hung up on the wall. But Alan and company have always been way out there. They've been doing things for years, like Fred and Adam, all of these just big, gnarly, wonderful beers. I know John's a big fan of Adam. I know so that he's run around and made about 1,000 Adam beers by now. Right? And you know, one of my favorite memories was one year when we won the Anchor Christmas or California Trouble of the Year Award. We went up, did our whole weekend of craziness, and we closed off the weekend of craziness at the Celebrator birthday party. And it was on Trooper Pills out in Berkeley. And while we were there, Alan was there as well because he was one of the breweries pouring. And the Falcons had our own little table, and we were having a great time. And Alan walked up, and he dropped onto the table. We don't have it here. He dropped up on the table 2 magnums of Doggie Claws. Yeah. Wow. This beer, right? Yep. And we're like, oh, dude, thanks, man. That's awesome. Yeah, wow, great. You know, we popped it. We started sharing with everybody. Beers, beer festival being beer festival. 2 magnums went by very quickly. Very well enjoyed by the club. Very well enjoyed by me. And then, sat those down, the empties, turned around, started talking to people, turned back around. 2 full ones on the table. I think all in all, Alan dropped like 6 magnums on the table, and it was great. And I was fucking drunk. Yeah, by the way, me versus magnums of Doggie Claws, I lose every time. All right, so again, big, bold beer. 11%. Very brisk hop character, right? I mean, that's a big punch of bitterness right up in the front. There's some obvious sweetness to this, but it's got so much of the hop character to it that I don't know if you even care. I don't. Does anybody else care? Yeah, I mean, this is Doggie Claws Barley Wine Style Ale.
This is 11%?
Yep. Yeah, 11%.
You don't get it.
Yeah. That's a reason why you lose in a battle versus Magnum. Because this stuff will kick your ass in about 20 seconds. So, what are we thinking? Obviously, a lot of big American hop characters.
Yes, you
John?
Well, it's wonderful, like all the beers.
Yeah. So,
they're all barley wines, by the way.
Yeah, this is brand new. This is like Izzy dropped these off at the December meeting before they had even been released on the street. But we had so much beer at the last meeting that I sequestered them away for this one.
Yeah. This could also sit around for years.
Yeah.
So these have been aged 30 years.
Yeah. So this is as fresh as Doggie Claws will get. And I can tell you right now, yeah, I think you could safely go walk into, if you're like me and you have a basement, throw a 6-pack of this into the basement for like 5 to 10 years. If you have crawl space, 5 to 10 years. If you don't, okay, 3 years. But I think this could really just sit around and do some real wonderful magic. Because right now, this tastes pretty damn good, but it's also a hop bomb right now. Other comments?
It's nice to get the fresh.
Oh, well, no. So the reason why I say it's a hop bomb is I'm thinking of this in terms of like the aged versions of Dogfishhead I've had, and it ages that big bright hop character drops, and the malt kind of comes forward a little bit more, and you can feel that little bit of sweetness, right? Yeah, and that becomes a little bit more of a prominent character. And it becomes a little bit more traditional Englishy barley wine, even though the English don't typically do a barley wine at 1%. So again, wow, right?
Delicious.
Yeah, and by the way, if you ever get a chance, if you go up to Portland, Oregon, go visit the brewery, and if you're ever there for Oregon Brewers Festival, on the first day of Oregon Brewers Festival, I think you went to this, right?
Yeah, not anymore, they don't do it anymore.
Oh, they don't do it? Oh, damn, it was so fun. They used to throw a big party on the first day of Oregon Brewers Festival with a giant fruit spread and all this beers, including the super secret, not quite legal Dave and Eve and all these other ones. Those were perfect. So, oh well, too bad you guys missed it by not getting there before now. But still, make sure you go to the Hair of the Dog, because they are a great brewery. Alan is wacky in the best sense of it, with a large sense of tradition. Like, he's one of the few guys who would ever thought of doing an Adam beer, and kind of single-handedly kept the style sort of alive for people to see. And he just does these things, and a lot of these beers, despite what the amount of effort name is Dogfishhead, he has a fairly unique focus in American craft brewing, because he does express so much malt character in these beers. You think about how many American brewers out there are all like, well, I got a truck full of hops, so we'll just use that. So,
one comment about that Friday thing that they used to have. One time I got a chance to share a Ice Adam beer that I brought up from LA with Fred Eckhart and Alan at the same time, just all sitting at the table sharing and talking about Adam beers. That was pretty cool.
Cool. What is an Adam beer?
Say one time going.
What is an Adam beer?
We'll talk about it in a second.
Matt, which was, I think, one of my favorite beers of all time. Matt, yeah, and it was so delicious. And hey, thanks again.
All right.
It's a big,
big malt bomb of booze, which is a lot of Alan's brewing philosophy. So Adam beer, since you guys asked. We'll probably do that at a later time, but the real quick high synopsis of it. Traditional, strong Dortmund-style ale, classic back to the time of the medieval period, if you assume that the legends are correct. And there are lots of legends around Adam beer. Pretty well forgotten by the time that we get up into the modern era. And Alan, in a lot of ways, was responsible for reviving the style. Because the idea was it was supposed to be like just this big, super alcohol malt bomb with a fairly brisk hop character for medieval beers.
How's it spelled?
ADM.
There's no title about it.
Yeah, it's a great beer style. John is probably the biggest devotee of it in the club.
Yes, sir.
Cool. And so if John brings an Adam, make sure you taste it. So wonderful beer style, and if you see the Hair of the Dog stuff, totally grab it, because it is the progenitor of the modern understanding of style. How much that has connection to the ancient style, who knows? Who cares? It's a great beer. No, it's your own. So, all right. Now we're going to move into a special project. They're going to pour it, but I'm going to do the quote, the rundown here. Fuller's. How many people like a Fuller's the best? Oh, Fuller's lost a lot of votes this time. Can't imagine why. All right. We know Hebrew didn't get a Pennsylvania Tuxedo. Still has its devotees. The 2015 Super Jubel. All right, that still has its devotees. And you obnoxious whore and you're in the Doggie clause. All right.
What was that on song?
It was close.
All right. So that's that's 11%, and that's easily, that's probably number 2 for me. All right, so now, Falconsclaws. I think we're getting down towards the end of this.
We are.
So, how many people have ever had Santa Claus? All right. So Santa Claus has the reputation for years. It was the strongest beer in the world. I think it's the title that holds now is the strongest lager in the world. It was originally brewed by Herlemann Brewery in Switzerland. It was brewed once a year on Swiss Christmas, or St. Nicholas Day, which is December 7th, I think. And then the previous year's vintage was released that same day. It comes in at about 14% alcohol. When I joined the club in 1999, it was the last year Herlemann made the beer. And they surrendered it. They stopped making it because it was incompatible with the modern brewing age. And so a couple of intrepid club members who absolutely loved the beer and having it as an annual tradition and refused to let it die, namely Kevin Baranowski, decided, well, you know what? Screw it. We're home brewers. If the beer is going away, we'll make it ourselves. And so that kicked us off on a 4-year?
I think we did 3 years.
3-year cycle of making a recipe that we call Falconsclaws. Now, keep in mind, this is a 13 to 15% alcohol by volume lager beer. It is Doppelbock writ large. Yeah, this is the 2000. Oh, this is the 3. All right, sorry, 2003. So this is 12 years old now. 12 years from the brewing date.
What about you guys 12 years ago?
Yeah.
I've been babysitting this.
And it's been sitting in his chest freezer. So,
Lives in my chest freezer year round.
all the recipes for this are on the Malty website. But all of these beers, we quickly figured out the real key to it. The first year that we tried to do it, we did it with a Bavarian lager strain, I think, and it turned out okay. I think that's the 2000, right?
Yes.
And it turned out okay, but it didn't quite finish the way that we wanted it to. The very next year, I think it was, White Labs released for the first time their Zurich lager strain, which is supposedly the Herlemann yeast used in Santa Claus. And this thing is a big mess of a beer. And we did this every year that we did it party hour. Because, frankly, there was so much malt in these tons. It was back when we were using the old system inside the shop with the keg kettles, as you, depending on who you are, the keg kettles, and we literally overflowed those kettles every year, just to make sure that we could get enough malt into this thing. And even then, I think the first year had DME in it. Actually, no, I think all of them had.
They all have DME.
All of them had DME in it, so we get the gravity up. Because the original gravity on these is a 1.140. All right, that is mildly insane. All right, yeah, and so every year we did a second run. Like 1 year we did a Schwartz beer, another year we did a Bach, and then I forget what we did the third year. But every year, and I don't think any of those beers, the second runnings, ended up being below 1050. Yeah, they were regular beer strength beers, and they were awesome. Now, one of the lessons that we learned, and we should hopefully see the difference here with the 2000, is once we even got the Zurich lager strain, which is designed to take that ABV level, which is sort of an insane ABV level, it helped immensely for us to start the beer with a yeast cake from a previous batch. So I started to make an annual Schwartz beer that was brewed with the Zurich lager yeast, so that I would make 5 gallons of Schwartz beer, take the yeast cake from that, and all that yeast cake. You know, most of the time you see people say, "Oh, you only need part of a yeast cake in order to propagate it." Now, since this was a monster of a beer, we just basically took the whole Zurich lager yeast cake and just went right into 5 gallons of this beer. The fermentations on these were epic. But I remember because the very first year that we did, the 2000, Kevin complained about the fact that it took so long for it to run out, and even had to have helper yeast into it. By the time we did this one, the 2003, yeah, we had that fermentation so nailed in terms of the lager yeast going into it. Never needed any help, and it finished out fairly quickly. The rest of the time it was just aging. So, what do we think?
It's aged well.
What's the hops?
Was there hops in there?
Ultra low.
No, just ultra low noble hops. There's like hops and like a couple of variants, probably like Tetnang and.
It's kind of a bit of a tart note that really kind of makes the fruit flavors come out.
Yeah, it's very low. But yeah, it is interesting because over time, this has definitely picked up that sour fruit character.
Where did that ever get to?
So, yeah, who knows? Somebody got to the keg. Look, most homebrewing is a waiting game for, there's a waiting game against bacteria finally taking hold, right? And this is 13 years.
It's not if so much as flavor.
Yeah, 12, 13 years.
True. When you have a fermenting beer like this, the hopping level is very aged for 5 or 6 years. Don't you have to go to behind the stars?
Actually, on this one, I don't think we did. If somebody pulls up, quick, somebody do a Google search for Maltose Falconsclaws.
Well, the thing was, it was so hard to get it to really attenuate. I mean, we never got a real finishing gravity because you drop a hydrometer on it and it would bounce.
Look, if we'd had all the camera phones back in the day, and we could have taken pictures of the hydrometer initially, everybody would have laughed because I mean, it was like, you filmed the hydrometer jar up and it was just basically like bobbing and like, nope, not going.
It was kind of beer pornish.
But no, I think some of what you're getting, there's probably some level of bacteria here, but I also think what you're actually getting is oxidation of alcohol. Yeah, and oxidation of alcohol.
No wood, no barrel.
It doesn't taste the same.
Yeah.
No, it's not.
Can you talk about some of the things you had to dial in to get such a high gravity line fermentation work well?
Well, the primary thing, by far and away. So Josiah's question was, what do we have to dial in order to get the lager fermentation to work so well at this gravity? Was the big thing was getting that yeast cake. That was the first key. Yeah, and we're not, because remember, the amount of yeast that you need to properly be a proper population for a beer scales as the gravity scales, right? So those white yeast and white labs packs are designed to handle, like, say, a 1050, 1060 beer at 5 gallons. As you go up,
This is 2003.
they require, no, this is 2000. As they go up in gravity, you require more yeast, right? With lagers, it's even worse. Because lagers already start at a much higher need for a pitch count. Those packs aren't quite sufficient.
I'm not sharing this one.
The rule
About double, right?
Rule of thumb is 2 or 3 times as much yeast, the same drinking, or the same
14%. Right. So,
12
with
20 ounce pints.
so with the big key for 01, 02, and 03 was that we discovered that idea of let's make a base beer, and again my Schwartz beer, build up a yeast cake, and then use that. The other keys, we actually this was I think the first time we ever played around with doing multiple oxidation steps. And what did you do? 3? So every 12 hours or so, or every day?
Every day.
All right. Every day, another goose of oxygen, pure oxygen via stone, into the fermenter. Normally we think, oh God, fermentation started. No oxygen ever. You'll ruin the beer. Yeah, this was for the first 3 or 4 days, a little dose of oxygen every day. Just the idea is the oxygen kicks the yeast back into that mode where they're trying to reproduce and build stout walls. Because remember, oxygen wort, yeast metabolize that, turn that into sterols, and the sterols are then used to build strong, flexible cell walls. And in this case, we need those strong, flexible cell walls because, oh my God, the osmotic pressure is beyond belief.
You need to get that, those additional shots of oxygen, you have to make sure that you get that before the period where all the oxygen is all used up and you got that sort of transformation.
Yeah, I mean, in a normal beer, absolutely. With a beer with this much gravity in it, your period of time that you're going to be in fermentation where the yeast are going to be active and pulling oxygen out, it's going to be a long time.
Well, remember, like Steve just said, this is lager yeast, so it's not going to be. It's not like you're going to be gushing and blowing off, super hard. No. If I recall, it wasn't that. Chris, that's right. Yeah, because of the type of yeast.
Well, well, there's a difference, right? So most people tend to measure the ferocity. Most people measure the ferocity of their fermentation by the amount of poison that's being generated, or the amount of blow off, right? Like, oh god, I got this pitcher is being built up. Lager yeast don't do that, right? So you wouldn't have seen the big poison, but there still would have been a fairly active amount of CO2 being off gas. So, what do we think here? This is the 2000. Now remember, when we brewed this, this was the one that we had the real fermentation problems with.
Yes.
And it took a long time. This had the floor sherry yeast added to it, and that finally drug it down. But even still, the final gravity was actually still a bit higher. Now, what I think is interesting is I think the higher final gravity in this one has actually helped it age a little bit better.
Well, and you get more mouthfeel out of this one. I think one of the other years that we finished already was much thinner than this, and you feel the mouthfeel of this is much, the viscosity of this is much thicker than even the 2003. In my book, even though there's different flavors to them, I think the mouthfeel is way different in this one.
Yeah, this is the 2000 you have right now. How many? Well, I was going to say, the first year we poured this, it was pancake.
Oh no, that's right. Well, this has got a little bit better than pancake syrup. Right?
So
it was pretty sweet before.
Now, by the way, this really does speak to the need that, as homebrewers, one of the most important things you can ever do is embrace your sense of recklessness. Do something incredibly stupid and just be patient about it.
My kegs too. I never get my kegs warm. So other than maybe travel between places, between whatever it took to get from my house to here today, these kegs have always been cold conditioned for the last 50, whatever years these are. They've been in cold condition. One refrigerator, the main refrigerator that's sitting is at 34, so they're sitting at 34 pretty much.
That's why they're still
and I'm not touching it. We bring this out at sometimes the December meeting. So next year in December, it's going to go back in there again and sit for the next year.
Yeah, Kevin.
Nice job.
Well, now, by the way, one of the things, very much that same point. Fletch, when was the last San Diego AHA conference before this year? It's like 4 years, 5 years? Yeah. So 4 years. One of the beers I brewed for that was a beer I called the Gnome is in the Details, which is like a light Belgian farmhousey beer. They use the Jubel yeast, right? Or the Ardennes yeast. That beer, 1055 original gravity. That beer stayed fresh in the keg until this year, when I finally poured the last segment of it. It was like a 5 to 6% beer, but because I kept it at very cold temperatures, like 34 degrees, it stayed good that whole time. So never underestimate the power of cold storage. All right. Any other comments about the Falconsclaws?
Yeah. It's damn good.
Yeah, very good.
Let's do it again.
Wait, guys.
I pulled up the recipe. Put in perspective, the grain bill is 27 pounds of grain.
For 5 gallons.
For 5 gallons.
Wait, really? Wait, hold on.
Yes.
Importantly,
27 and a quarter.
27 pounds of grain for 5 gallons of the main beer and 10 gallons of the secondary beer.
Okay. Yeah. 10 gallons.
That's a lot of secondary beer.
Well, and also now we have more capacity than we had then.
Yeah.
Now we got
Yeah. So, again, to my point, remember, sometimes you have to embrace epic stupidity. Sometimes you eat dirt when you do it. Yeah, sometimes you eat the bar, sometimes the bar eats you. So let's get a little show of hands on this one. This is separate outside of this because I think all you alcohol whores out there decide that you like the Irish. Alright, let me see a show of hands. The very first Falconsclaws that you had was the 2003. How many people like the 2003? That was the one with the apricot flavor. Alright? And how many people like the 2000? Alright, so the 2000 knows out the 2003. Well, both of those, absolutely amazing for a beard that old.
Excited for one more year.
Alright, and one final thing before we go offline and actually start to get into our regular business. Actually, no, we're gonna let Craig do his demonstration online. Oh yeah. Sorry, buddy. You got money. But I do also want to put out there. I just launched 2 months ago my podcast, Experimental Brewing. It's Denny Kahn and I. We put up an episode every 2 weeks, and our next episode is going to be this Wednesday, where we're talking about actually kicking off our second brewing experiment. So if you guys want to get involved and do some beer science, feel free to join up, and it's going to be fun. And by the way, logo, courtesy of Mr. Davis. We have to come up with a name for this guy.
I thought that looked like Cullen.
Yeah, so far my name for him is
eyes on the top of
Igor.
Well, right now his name is Dr. Igor Stein.
Igor.
Igor Steen.
Exactly.
All right.
Henry Jekyll.
Alright.
Because he's just drinking it, exactly.
Alright, boys and girls. Thank you so much for giving me the And now, we turn it over to Mr. Craig.
This will just take a few minutes. I'm going to demonstrate.
While Craig's setting up, I just want to see who here has not been to one of these meetings before. Hey, welcome. Okay. You over there with the red beard, please tell us who you are and why you're here. What got you into brewing?
My name is Rich Reber.
Hi, Rich.
Thank you. I got into brewing because I needed a reward to myself when I finished my thesis.
Are you a chemist?
No. I'll get there. But I basically learned to brew and immediately brewed all the beer for my wedding and, for lack of a better phrase, fucked it all up. No one noticed, so it was good.
I had other people brew my wedding.
Yeah.
So it was great.
I could get out of wedding planning by saying it was a brew day. And I was here with one of my colleagues. I'm actually with the JPL Homebrew Club up at the Jennifer Balchin Laboratory, and every year we have an inter-NASA center homebrew competition. Oh. Yeah, so all the NASA centers from around the country send in their beers. And last year we won it, so we get to host this year. So we're looking for beer judges.
Need judges?
Yeah, we do need professional beer judges. It's going to be around.
Professional.
Certified beer judges. So we're having our competition about mid-April. Ish, 16th maybe that Saturday. But that's why I'm here. I love beer. Thank you for sharing. Welcome.
My name's Ian Carroll. I got into brewing because I love good beer and I like making stuff basically. So a couple years ago, got my first kit. It was a complete homebrew kit from Williams Brewing, and just kind of been adding to that ever since. And this is, I've been a member of the club for a few months, but haven't been able to make the meeting. So I'm here now and trying to get really involved. Got fired up. Got some good new equipment and stuff for Christmas, so I'll be brewing all the time now.
Do we have a job for him so we can snare him immediately?
Yeah. I'm on the board. Who's next?
I'm Veronica Hernandez. I'm here because my husband started brewing and I really like beer.
I'm Hernandez. A couple of buddies at work started brewing. I wanted to join, and thank you very much for having me. I'm Brennan, and I'm an engineer, and I like to build stuff, and it's really satisfying making beer. And my wife is a scientist and constantly tells me I'm doing everything wrong. And I have. All my beers
That's not just because she's a scientist.
But there is that extra conflict between scientists and engineers. Right. So I do want to say a quick show of hands. How many people in this room are involved in science, engineering, or some other technical profession?
Yeah.
That's about right.
You found your crowd.
No, you're not.
Alright, so this is the newbie section, I guess. So I've actually been a Falcon off and on, but I just really have not had time to come. But I'm Jennifer. I'm the owner of one co-owner of McLeod Brewing. So I have done a little bit of home brewing, but I do have other people who do a way better job of that than me. So anyway, I'm really glad to be here. I'm going to really try to come every month and be with y'all and learn a lot and enjoy some good beer.
Hey guys, I'm Adrian. I've been brewing for about a year and a half now. Until recently I was living in New York for school, so I've been brewing very small, just almost entirely 1 gallon batches, a lot of them. And they've been alright. They've been like, and so yeah, it's been good. I love beer. I'm glad to be here.
How old are you again?
I'm 22.
Anybody else? Okay. Pay attention to Craig, and then we'll break for lunch after Craig's done with his cookie demo here.
And don't forget, when we break for lunch, if you have beer for tasting, put it up here on the board, because that's a short
That's
tasting.
yeah.
Compared to last month.
Yeah. They were busy drinking it all in December. Now they don't have any.
So what I'm going to demonstrate is kind of a hack for the March pump thing. It was always, obviously, I'm looking at this one. It's not mine, but sometimes they break and sometimes they get clogged up on you and they can be a mess during brewing. And I like this for my brewery with John. We use these bag-in-box pumps, which are not really rated for 212 degrees. Put it on the table, maybe. Oh yeah, move your phones. I'm just going to transfer some liquid here, just some water, as a demonstration. And I actually don't do this with CO2, even though I could because I have a lot of CO2. But I just brought it for convenience today to demonstrate it. But I use like one of those little pumps, those little air pumps that has an automatic shut off, little compressor with a holding tank, and it doesn't cycle very often during the brew day. Maybe I have to move this up.
Well, and so the real quick one point is that a lot of times with pumps that are air driven, like sometimes you have to check if they're capable of using CO2 on an ongoing basis.
Oh yeah. Yeah, well, these can use CO2 on an ongoing basis. They're in the industry. They do that. They're moving the syrup from the boxes into the dispenser. But
so those you don't know, like some of these air-driven pumps, if you're pumping them with CO2, the CO2 basically messes with the seals and other sorts of badness. So you can't always use CO2 with an air-driven pump.
So they have little snap connectors on them, which are kind of convenient. This is just one particular model. They come from SureFlow, they come from FlowJet, and 2 or 3 other manufacturers. I kind of like these guys. They're this is the uptake. So I got the uptake hose in a bucket here. It could go to the side of your hot liquor tank valve or to your mash tun to move the wort around, wort off, or when you mash out to.
Careful, Craig's having problems with mating.
Got it. And then, so the way I use it is I just use a step-down regulator, which is this little guy here, and dial it up to maybe 3 or 4 psi. It's just the taste. it's self-priming, so you can mount the pump anywhere you want and move products around easily, and you can control the flow rate by just adjusting the pressure. If you want it to go real slow, for moving around the system, and then you can also restrict it on this side of it if it's not hot. If it's hot, I wouldn't recommend doing that unless you have some high temperature, super high temperature hose on the outtake, because you might blow one off. I say that because we did that.
We definitely did that. Hey, Craig, can you use a little ball valve on the gas outlet to control the pressure?
Well, the problem with the ball valve is it's going to see the same pressure that this has eventually, that the high pressure regulator might, that's on your tank or on your compressor.
So, the valve regulates flow and pressure.
It'd be better to use a regulator, but these are really cheap and simple. You can find them on eBay sometimes for a couple of bucks. So
I just already have a valve, so
yeah. Well, you could use that to regulate it on the outtake if you wanted, but with caution because of hot temperatures, especially 212 degrees. And so,
can we see this going full bore?
Yeah, we can. And it's going to make some noise. And here's where the problem with CO2 comes in when it is up at full bore, and it can go up to about 40 psi. It'll move. This was like 2 gallons, and it'll move it. Yeah. Look at it. It'll move 2 gallons rather quickly, or 15 gallons rather quickly. And then when it finishes, when it but it also does a little. If you have a sterile environment that you're coming out of, like a boil kettle, it'll take that air that's in there that's probably safe, and it'll aerate your water if you're at that stage, going into the fermenter. And we basically take this and go through a word chiller that's a little bit specialized, but it does a really good job, and we can move the 15 gallons into the fermenters in about 15 minutes or less.
Well, and if you're the kind of person who's using a counter or not a counter, but a commercial chiller in your kettle, you can still chill everything in your kettle, and then use this pump actually safely to move it.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah.
And also, like all this is food safe stuff is pumping food.
So what is the heat rating? What's the max rating?
Well, the rating is 170 for this, and but I've tested it. I've tested this at 212 for about 20 minutes with no ill effects, and so I use it as a pump for maybe my keg cleaning setup, or for, like I say, transferring water around, as you during the brew day. And these are relatively cheap. I think the retail on them is about $45.
So $45 for the pump.
Yeah.
And then how much for the whole gear?
Well, all you would need is this and a regulator and one of those little airbrush sort of.
Assuming that you already had.
Well, if you want to use CO2, you can. And if you run out of CO2, you'll be crushed.
So, how much for all the so ignoring the air source.
All full, tilt retail, probably $75, I would say.
Which is cheaper than the March pump.
Yeah. And these things are quite easy to change.
Sorry.
Yeah, you can get little giant magnetic drive pumps, which is the same thing. Well, I've personally been using one for 14 years, same pump. And if you keep an eye on eBay, there's a seller that basically an outlet seller for the range. And the last time I bought one for the club system when we needed a second pump, got it for $80. Shipping, including shipping.
Is that the same kind of pump they use for long draw beer systems?
Well, it's similar. The one for the long draw beer system has a sanitary flush valve that's also built into the side of it. And it's also slightly different because it'll handle carbonated or slightly carbonated beers. But I've often thought that you could use one of those type, which are also relatively inexpensive for, say, a cask system. You need a vent.
This is a positive displacement pump.
Okay.
And now we merge into the pump nerdy.
Oh, wait a minute. I'm not an engineer, but my right side always already so
If you close the outlet on that, or it gets kinked, the outlet hose,
yes.
You're asking to get scalded.
Oh, that's what I say. You don't want to do that with anything but high temperature on the outlet side.
Well, see, high temperature hose won't stand up like the silicone hose. If you close it,
no, not silicone.
Well, high temperature food grade hose will take the temperature. It still won't take the pressure.
Right, ladies and gentlemen, you are now realizing that pumps and hosing is much more complicated than you ever thought. As we start getting
Using your own risk. I have some that I've installed that does like
just don't close it.
That's my question. What's the advantage over an electrical system?
Why use this as opposed to like a large or?
Oh, well, because these are relatively cheap and I have a ton of them. But
wait a second, you want some commercial?
If you'd like to buy one of these, please contact Craig after this meeting for a special discount mentioned on those Falcons.
So you don't affiliation.
Yeah, right. I have like 3 of them in my system, so I use them at the same time. I've got 3 little regulators set up on a manifold, and it works good for me. Moving stuff around. I've had trouble with March pumps either clogging up, and then it's like, oh, now what do I do? And I've got a bucket things from here to there, and these, they haven't failed on me yet. So what I have going on.
Well, and you said these are self-priming, right?
They're self-priming as well.
Nice.
So you can mount them where you want, and March is not. It's got to go, down below liquid levels.
So the self-priming is a nice feature, but there are trade-offs with some of the stuff that we talked about.
Alternative design.
Yeah, that's right. And there's nothing wrong with being alternative, as we discovered here in the state of California.
That's our option. Any more questions for Craig? Thank you, Craig.
Thank you, Craig.
We're going to go ahead and break for lunch. When we come back, we'll have some homebrew. We'll talk some business. Make sure you get one of these ballots so you can vote for which one of the brews is best.
And real quick, if you have beers that you want to do about troubleshooters, come find me inside.
You got to buy a ticket from Kent before you can eat.
I mean, I've been
almost all of these.
I'm trying to take a selfie.
No, I asked her.
Who said that message, that thing we did?
That email about 2 months ago, and I stopped forgetting it. But he said he never saw So who do we have for the
lunch? Natalie, she's going to be doing burgers and fixing meat. Yeah, she's going to do it in Colorado. You have to price it that quick. Yeah. Since we're not going to have that many entries for Dogfishhead,
No, they were about 100, right?
100 over 100. And we got 54 on the line right now, so by the time we get those, we'll get to our 100.
Is that the California chart?
It is. All right, Internet. See you guys later. We're going to do troubleshooters here in a moment. And we'll have Chris, your beer, if you're online, we'll have yours. Bye. Maybe.